What's up guys, Justin here with the Character Essentials. So in today's video we're going to talk about how we can add a nav mesh inside of Iclone so that we can dictate where characters move using Motion Director. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so this is something that came out in the newest version, which I think was Iclone 8.4. So this should be included in the crowd tools that are in Iclone. And so I've just created a simple set of meshes in SketchUp just to kind of act as geometry for right now. And then I'm going to import this set of meshes into Iclone. So I've just done a file import, and in this case it's asking if I want to break up the meshes into subprops, and I'm going to say the answer is yes. Okay, and so now what this has done is this has brought this into Iclone, and you can see how these are in here as subprops. And if you look at your scene, you can click on the little drop down right here and see each one of these individually as well. But what I want to do is I want to generate a nav mesh on this surface, because what a nav mesh is going to do is it's going to allow me to create an area where we can automatically place characters. So I'm going to go to create, and I'm going to look for the option for generate nav mesh, and I want to select this overall object in order to do that. So I'm going to do a create nav mesh right here, and that's going to pop up a little window that looks something like this. And so what you can do is you can adjust this and click on the button to generate in order to create this nav mesh. And basically what this is doing is this is coming in here and this is trying to split up this surface in a way where the blue areas are safe areas for characters to walk, and then the other areas are areas where the characters are supposed to not walk. And so you can adjust things like the cell size in here. So when I adjust the cell size, notice how if I make that way bigger, then I'm not going to get as much area in here. If I make the cell size smaller, like this, then the cells are obviously going to get smaller. And what this does is this allows this to kind of find more areas for the characters to walk. In my opinion, it's kind of a good idea to play it a little bit safe with this when you do this. Just so you want to make sure that this nav mesh or the nav mesh edges that are created are far enough away from the objects in here that your characters aren't like clipping into them. Now there are also options in here to set like your cell height, and so your cell height is going to be how high off of the ground this is. So generally speaking, I'm leaving this one at 0. And then the other thing you can do is you can set the size and height of the agent. And so what that means is that basically if you had like a person in here, this is going to set the radius or the distance from objects that's set in here. So if I set this agent radius bigger, notice how this is going to go further away from the objects. If I set it smaller, then it's going to get a lot closer to the objects. So again, this is another area where setting the radius a little bit bigger is probably a little bit safer so that you don't have your characters crashing into things or clipping through them as they turn around, other things like that. So you can set this to do slopes and steps. We're not going to talk too much about that for right now. Now, one thing about this, and I don't think it's really that big of a deal in this case because this mesh area is kind of isolated, but you can, instead of using your scene in here, you can set a volume. And so if you click on create volume, what that's going to do is that's going to allow you to take a box like this one, and you can actually come in here and you can scale it. So I'm going to scale it, I'm going to move it like this. And so when you do this, and we're going to take this and make it a little wider like this. We may want to go into a top-down view, actually. We'll go into a top-down view right here just to make sure we're kind of centered out. But we're going to take this whole thing and we're going to draw or place this volume in the 3D space. And so the value of placing the volume is what I could do is I can bring this volume in, but then I could scale it on this Z axis like this. So when I do that, if I scale it down so that it's not including this part of the box right here, and then I click on generate, notice that's going to place this in here based on that volume area that you've placed. Now, we're running into some issues here because it's not really picking up these other objects. So this is something that's probably better used when you specifically want to dictate like one area. So like for example, whoops, I want to make sure I've just picked up that volume, not everything else. So this might be a little better if you just want to like dictate your own area in here like this. You can use the volume, but that'll give you a little bit more control. But in this case, I think I feel pretty good about this nav mesh that's been generated in here. So now let's take this and use it to scatter a crowd. And so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to create, and we're going to do a generate crowd under scatter. And so when I do that, what that's going to do is that's going to pop up our crowd generation function, which we've been talking about. And so in this situation, instead of spawn region create volume, we're going to pick an object. And so when we do that, what we can do is we can pick that nav mesh. And so when we select that nav mesh, what this is going to do is this is going to generate your crowd using that nav mesh. So notice how whenever it places the characters in here, none of them are being placed on the unsafe area or the area where you don't want characters. You do have to make sure when you do your generation that you're not generating a character on this little box right here. I don't know of a way to just get rid of this little box in here. If anyone knows of an area or a way to do that, let me know. But we're going to set our spacing higher, and we're going to bring our amount down a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and set some random orientation in here. I'm just going to randomly generate a couple times till I get one that I like. So this one is probably fine. And then we just need to add our characters. So when we add our characters, let's say that I wanted to add just some female characters. So we're going to search our actors in here, and that's going to pop them up over here. And then you can take them and you can click and drag them in. So I'm going to drag a couple of these actors in like this. And so now, if we were to click on deploy actors, it would place the actors in here. But before I want to do that, I want to make sure that I apply either a motion file or an IMD file. And we're going to go ahead and check the box for deploy with variant materials. But then I'm also going to bring in some IMD files for my animations. So, and I think you probably have a few of these built in, but then if you get any of the packs out of the store, then you're going to have more of these. But we're going to go down to the motion director files right here, and we're going to drag a couple of these in. And in this case, I'm going to pick the casual all female and maybe the casual stroll female right here, and maybe the casual walk female. And so in this case, we don't have any male actors in here, so we don't need to bring in any of the male animations. This should be good enough. But now, if I was to click on the button for deploy actors, and before I do that, by the way, I want to click on this little button right here, and I want to set this to perform frequency, and I'm going to set that to never. And so the reason why is because these IMD files will throw in some random movements in here sometimes with these casual walks, which isn't necessarily what I want. And this is kind of setting just when they're going to be idle, when they're going to move. But in this case, I want to set my perform frequency to never so that they're not like jumping up and down and waving in the air or anything like that. But once I have this all kind of set up the way that I want, I'm going to click on the button for deploy actors, and it's going to deploy those actors in my scene, and it's going to set them up with their random movements. So we'll give this a second to do this for all of those actors, and then we'll take a look at how we can animate this. And so right now you can see that what that's done is that's deployed all of these different actors in here. Notice how it's deployed variant colors. So like for example, the skirts on these characters are slightly different. The jackets on these characters are slightly different. So it's tried to mix up the colors in here so that we've got a little bit of variation. Okay, and so now we're done with this, so we're going to close out of it. And by the way, if you don't close out of it and you try to open up Motion Director, this isn't going to work. But now, what we've got is we've got all of these different characters in here, and they all have those animations applied to them. So if you click on this, notice how if you look down below, you've got all those different options that we could have set for each one of these, like this. But now, if I was to click on the start button over here, you don't want to click this one in your scene because nothing's going to happen. You want to click on the start button for motion director mode. And what that's going to do is that's going to process those actors, and it's going to actually make them move with the animations that we've applied to them. And so the cool thing about this is these are actually set up, and I'm going to kind of like rotate around, where they have kind of collision detection in here with the other characters. So notice how they're like seeing the other characters right here and stopping when they walk up to them, but they're also walking around these meshes. So it has this kind of like collision detection set in here. They are getting a little bit close to each other, which I think is something that we could kind of adjust in here. And so this is really cool because we've basically got a crowd in here right now that's set up to automatically walk around. So we can use this with different animations to have people like milling around within the crowds, other things like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and click on stop right here. Now the only thing that I'm not sure about, yeah, here we go. So notice how they were kind of like running into, they weren't necessarily running into each other, but they were maybe getting a little bit closer than I want them to. You could just select all of these characters right here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna adjust that agent radius to be a little bit higher. So what that means is that the radius this uses to detect other characters and other objects is going to be bigger. So now if I click on the start button, you're gonna notice that they're gonna be a little bit further away from each other than they were before. Like this. So now when they walk, notice how they don't get nearly as close to each other or the other objects in here. So notice how the collision detection is going on in here, other things like that. So pretty cool from that standpoint. We can actually set this up where these characters can smartly detect objects in the scene and move around without you having to manage any of that. Now the other thing about this is if you wanted to, because right now this isn't actually being applied to those characters, you could take this, select those characters and set this to record mode. And if you set this to record mode, what it's going to do is it's going to record those motions to these characters so that they're actually a part of your scene. So this allows you to actually create that animation in a way that it's actually applied rather than you having to be in this motion director mode in order to get the motions in here. So if you are looking to create something that's a little bit more maybe like final or something like that, you can use record mode in order to do that. And then once you're done, however many frames you want to generate in here, so I'll let this go to like 2000 for example. But then when you're done, you can just click on the stop button. And now if you click in here, notice how those animations are actually applied to those individual characters. And then you could come mess around with those in your animation timeline and all of that. But this is a quick, easy way to animate crowds in a smart way in Iclone. All right, so you're probably gonna have to play around with the NavMeshes a little bit, but they're pretty easy to generate. Leave a comment below, let me know if you have any questions. If you do want to give Iclone a try, I will link to it in the notes down below, so make sure you check that out. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.